Well, first up this morning, a class action in the making against the state government, the first of its kind, in fact, and potentially the largest of its type in WA's history. At the centre of the legal action is the Banksia Hill Detention Centre, which of course is a jail for children between the ages of 10 to 17, and a place that has had its fair share of troubled times over the past few years. But now about 300 of its former inmates have signed up to a class action, hoping to sue the state government for their treatment at the hands of the guards and the conditions of their imprisonment at Banksia Hill. Now, if you take time to read some of the reports into Banksia Hill by the Office of the Inspector of Custodial Services, you may think this class action has a chance of success because it doesn't make particularly pleasant reading. The most recent report, published just 2 months ago, paints a picture of young people being kept in their cells there, on average, 14 hours a day. It describes critical infrastructure shortfalls, including the lack of a proper crisis care unit, which you would think is pretty significant, resource and teaching materials, which are designed to rehabilitate, were still too limited, and a drug and alcohol counselling and support service had been withdrawn because funding had been lost. Now, the list goes on, but do these former child inmates have a case in this class action? Well, according to one of Australia's leading class action lawyers, they do. Stuart Levitt is a senior partner at Levitt Robinson Solicitors, and he will lead this case. Stuart, good morning.
Good morning.
Stuart, thanks for your time today. What sort of things are the inmates alleging, or will they be alleging, they were subjected to?
Well, one of the most appalling things is that they're there from the age of 10 years old, and I think it's an abomination that in Australia, in every state and territory, 10 years of age is the age of criminal responsibility, whereas it's substantially higher in France, Germany, Japan, Italy, Greece, South Korea, and Australia is one of the outlier countries in holding people accountable when they really are small children, pre-adolescent children. The second thing is that there's only one corrective services centre for children in the whole state of West Australia, which means that kids in outlying areas are uprooted and taken many hours away from their families, who are often very poor people, and not then in a position to visit them. Furthermore, they're held in solitary confinement for lengthy periods of time, and in those circumstances, there's been situations which we've been informed, and several of them, and people that I've had the opportunity to speak with personally, where the kids have been held over a period of 2 or 3 years for up to 6 months, longer than the Victorian COVID lockdown, cumulatively, in solitary confinement, and often, and in some there've been a couple of instances where kids have had so little mobility that they've developed blood clots as under the age of 13 years, which blood clots are usually suffered by people who are kept in hospital beds for a long period of time because they have so little opportunity for exercise. So there's some of the conditions, apart from restraints, spit hoods, handcuffs, all the usual paraphernalia, which are condemned by Amnesty international bodies, and also breach Australia's international obligations under the conventions to which we've subscribed.
Well, Stuart, some of those things you're describing sort of raise images in my mind of some of the things associated with the Dondale Correctional Centre, and you know the story, a terrible story
Sure.
behind that inquiry.
Absolutely.
So are you alleging similar sort of things? Are you saying it's almost as bad?
Well, I'm not saying it's almost as bad. It is bad, and it's been going on for a very long period of time. It's happened to a whole generations of children, a majority of whom are Indigenous, many of whom are intellectually challenged. Some have physical impairments as well, and there are also great children that almost invariably are considerably socially disadvantaged. They often have no homes, no families, no homes, no parental responsibility, and the state, instead of acting as a guardian to these children, effectively victimises them and denies them any reasonable foundation for a healthy and constructive life,
Well,
which is why there's such horrific suicide rates.
some of the things you're describing are perhaps the reason they're in there in the first place.
Well, absolutely. And the fact is that instead of, I mean, it's too much the position throughout Australia, but equally in West Australia, where we're looking at, we're treating Indigenous people and also disadvantaged people as a blight on the landscape, as a kind of a vermin that needs to be eradicated or put away, instead of using community services and Christian love to support people.
Well, yeah, that's the whole point of rehabilitation, isn't it? You would think at any stage of the prison system it would have to come right at the very beginning, where you were jailing people from 10 to 17 years old.
Sure. I mean, the three principles. I did criminology as one of my master's subjects, and one of the three principles of criminal justice: rehabilitation, deterrence, and retribution. You can't rehabilitate a kid because he hasn't learned to do the right thing in the first place. So all they do in the West Australian prison system for children is retribution and deterrence. They deter nothing because they put these kids back out on the street with no means of support, and the only way that they can sustain themselves is by returning to crime.
Stuart,
and
sorry, what period will this cover, this class action?
Well, the Banksia Hill was started in the late 90s, but there'll be limitation periods that affect kids. But somebody that was a child in detention will have a period of time after they turn 18 to be able to bring the action going backwards. So, it'll cover thousands of children potentially.
So late 90s to now.
Yeah, but some people there'll be limitation periods that cut in with some of them, but there may well be exceptions in those circumstances too, because of their psychological injury and their ability to be able to access justice in that period,
Okay.
intervening period.
Well, my understanding is you've got 300 signed up already, but are you expecting
That's
more?
right. Oh yeah, these are people that have signed up to the idea of something. When there's a reality, when there's actually a case running, it's inevitable that there'll be a much greater sign up. And also, if we're successful, we usually find a hell of a lot of people registering as soon as the good news is out, because there's an understandable lack of faith in lawyers and in the corrective services system and the justice system overall in West Australia. So the fact that we've got 300 kids that are prepared to commit even now is a real boon, and it's a tribute to the good work of Jerry Georgatos, Megan Krakauer, Connie Georgatos, and the Georgatos Foundation.
Well, we're going to catch up with Jerry in just a moment, Stuart. So thank you very much for your time this morning.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Stuart Levitt, he's a senior partner at Levitt Robinson Solicitors, the lawyer leading this class action case against the government on behalf of those so far 300 former inmates at Banksia Hill. One of those former inmates, we'll call him John for legal reasons this morning, is now 22 years old. Joins us on the program. John, how are you this morning?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good, thanks. John, tell us a bit about your issues with Banksia Hill, about the way you were treated there.
Firstly, is when you go in there, straight away you're subjected to a strip search that absolutely strips you of your dignity and your pride as a young male, to be strip searched and told to lift your genitalia. I don't want to go into too much detail because it was embarrassing while they laugh at you as you're stripped down. It strips you of all your pride and dignity and makes you feel like nothing.
But you knew you would be punished, right, when you went in there. What age were you when you spent your first day at Banksia Hill?
I was 13.
13. And how much time did you spend in there all up?
Roughly a year and a half.
What was the worst part for you, John?
My ankle was nearly snapped while I was in there.
How did that happen? Explain that to me.
I was completing my duties in one of the wings, and before I finished, I was promised a phone call when I actually completed the duties by an officer. By the time I finished my duties, he had left and another guard has replaced him in the wing. As I finished, I went to go towards the telephone to make my phone call, where I was stopped and verbally abused by this other officer, and I asked why I was being abused, which led to him calling code red and me being detained, picked up, slammed on my head and carried down to solitary confinement, where I refused to be strip searched again, only because it was such an embarrassing and traumatic experience the first time, where I was then slammed again whilst being handcuffed. I had two officers, one with their knee in the back of my neck, another with his knee in my lower back, whilst one of the officers had me in ankle lock, and I plead out that he was hurting me and said, "How bad does it hurt?" It couldn't hurt too bad because you're resisting. I was not resisting whatsoever. I could hardly even move. He kept twisting and twisting until I felt a tearing sensation and pain that I cannot describe. I pled out for help, and he didn't stop until one of the officers that was in my back actually told him to stop.
And what happened to your ankle, John?
I was actually hospitalised. I had to be taken via Serco to Fiona Stanley Hospital in a wheelchair, and then I think they tore a few ligaments and tendons in my ankle, and I had to go back to Banksia Hill on crutches for the remaining time I was there.
And how old were you then?
I was 14.
14. And did you ever try to ask any of the authorities to inquire into that situation? Did knowing that they've got a lot of CCTV in Banksia Hill, maybe they would have had it on camera?
No, because at the time of the incident, I was thrown up against the bed, and as I turned my head, an officer was holding a pillow in front of the camera so they couldn't see what they were doing to me, and after seeing that, I was frightened. I didn't want to speak about it. It absolutely terrified me.
John, did you know a lot of other people in there, a lot of other inmates that had similar sort of situations?
Oh, yeah, I've seen it firsthand, boys being picked up and slammed on their heads. There's another way of restraining people. They're trained professionally to restrain you, but they're using excessive force. There's no need to pick a child up and slam them on their head.
Now, John, I've got to ask you, why were you in there in the first place? What were you found guilty of?
I was found guilty of aggravated armed robbery, but I was forced to do it by older peers because I was the youngest in the car.
So what would you say to anyone listening this morning who'd say, well, you pretty much deserved whatever was in store for you because you had committed such a crime?
I say no one deserves to be treated like that, especially a child. Yeah, I committed that crime and I'm completely and utterly remorseful. I admit that it was wrong and I regret my decision. I was young and dumb, but that still does not give them the right to treat me like that or treat any other child like that.
John, thank you very much for being up front with us this morning. We really appreciate it.
No, it's fine. Thank you. Thank you for your time, for having me.
No, pleasure. John's a former inmate, just one of the former inmates of Banksia Hill that's signed up to this class action, 300 so far. Jerry Georgiatis is a coordinator of the National Suicide Prevention and Trauma Recovery Project and has been working with many of the former inmates like John. Jerry, good morning.
Good morning, Liam.
Paints a bit of a horror picture, doesn't it?
It's harrowing. It is a horror picture. The Productivity Commission's reports every year come back with pretty much the same. Every 10 days, there's an assault in Banksia on average. And on average, every 2 days, there's suicidality or self-harm. And 1 in 4 of detainees throughout the year receive no educational activity, of what little educational activity there is, which I have to say is low caliber, and even low caliber is too kind.
See, that's very depressing, Jerry, isn't it, to hear that? Because of all the places, of all the prison systems that we have in operation, you would think that this place foremost first and foremost, would have rehabilitation material coming out of its ears. So we got the kids back on the right track.
Well, they're missed opportunities. The psychosocial and psychoeducative, the intense psychosocial support just does not happen. The restorative just does not happen. And it's a missed opportunity for a lot of children which, to be honest, have no safety nets on the outside or have very weak safety nets or don't have the mentors and supports or the assistances for those who have family to support them through the disadvantage they were born into. But in my experience over many years working with predominantly marginalised and impoverished children and older individuals, but with children we're talking about now, children that go into Banksia Juvenile Detention Facility in general come out worse for it, not better. And we weren't put on this earth to betray our children.
How much do you think this claim could run to, Jerry, against the state government?
Anything between 100 million to 300 million. And I say that, and I'm not the law firm running it. I'm a person who's helped galvanise it and bring it together.
Yeah.
But I expect before the year's end we will have 1,000 plaintiffs. We've got 300 now. We'll be at 500 within 4 weeks. We'll be going to the Kimberley on the 27th of September. Megan Cracker, myself, and Connie Georgiadis, my daughter. And we've got to do the outreach and the in-person because we're not going to reach the impoverished and those entrenched in the sense of permanency of that poverty that you yourself know all too well. So we've got to do the in-person, not to leave them behind and bring on many as possible. But if I'd love to see them all score 100,000 each in terms of compensability. In general, at an individuated basis, when they're being individually represented, 20 or 30,000 is what they're scoring. But when so many are actually arguing so much the same, that goes to corroboration and that goes to heart and soul of evidence. And I'd like to see 100,000 for each one to have a good shot at life. If there's 1,000 plaintiffs, that's 100 million.
Yeah, Jerry, it's hard to argue with you about the figures. Listen, stay in touch with us, won't you? Keep in touch with the program and let us know how you're going with it. It's an important action either way, both for the state and also for those people at the centre of it. Thanks very much for your time this morning.
Thanks, Liam. Much respect, brother. And it's in everybody's best interest that we do the right by our young ones. Thank you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Jerry Georgiadis there for National Suicide Prevention and Trauma Recovery Project. I mean, the thing is, no one wants to be soft on crime. There's no doubt about that. Nobody. Well, I don't know anybody that does. But that sort of is that sort of treatment, the treatment that we're hearing about this morning, is that a deterrent? I mean, you can only think that it would set these kids up for a life of criminal misadventure. It just would harden them, would it not? Coming from those sorts of backgrounds. 133 882. Tell us what you think this morning on the program. 133 882.